Hat, check. Sunglasses, check. Notes, check. Pepsi, check. Sources, check. Thick skin, check. Oh, and one more thing. 10,000 subscribers, check. Let's go! First things first, guys, we did it. We hit 10,000 subscribers, and we did it a lot sooner than what we were anticipating. So I appreciate everybody hitting the like and subscribe button. There would be no Golden Blue Dude without you guys, so I'm super excited about that. We're going to have a celebration show on Sunday. I'm thinking around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We haven't nailed it down yet, but we will by the end of the day. Later today, we'll do a live show, kind of a pre-celebration where we'll talk about it, but we're going to have a lot of guests for the Sunday live show, so stay tuned for that. On to today's video. For college football, a team's season can get derailed early in the season. I'm talking either the first or second game. And that's what I wanted to talk about in this video. Teams whose season that could get derailed in their first or second game of the season. They desperately need to win this first game to meet expectations of the year. So the first game I'm going to talk about is Nebraska versus Northwestern in Ireland. Both of these teams went 3-9 last year. Nebraska, though, all of their losses were by 9 points or less. And most of those were by 1 possession. The only game that they lost that was a little more than 1 possession was Ohio State, and that was by 9 points. So Nebraska is trending upward. They bring a lot of production back, hit the transfer portal well, and their schedule is actually easier than what it was last year. But it's still difficult. They get Oklahoma at home, go on the road to Purdue, they get Minnesota at home, at Michigan, Wisconsin at home, and at Iowa. So this game against Northwestern, very important mentally, of course, but you need every single win that you can get going into this schedule. And I think Scott Frost needs to win this game and needs to get to a bowl if he wants to keep his job. I'm telling you right now, if Nebraska loses this first game against Northwestern, Scott Frost could be fired immediately after the game. The next game I want to talk about is the backyard brawl, West Virginia at Pitt, and specifically for Neil Brown at West Virginia. Last year we actually took a step backwards from 6-4 in 2020 to 6-7 in 2021. So West Virginia needs to have a successful season this year for Neil Brown to feel good about himself. And Neil Brown's not going to get fired no matter what, even if he has a terrible season this year, just because of that buyout. So if Neil Brown turns out to be a bad hire, we're just going to have to bite the bullet until his contract is up. But as West Virginia fans, we want this to be a successful season. Last year, West Virginia went 6-7, and Pitt went 11-3. They were the ACC champs. I do think West Virginia will be trending upward this year, and Pitt will be trending downward this year. That's not me being a homer. It's just based on what both teams lost and what both teams gained. So after this, West Virginia's road games. They have 6 altogether, counting the road trip to Pitt. But after that, a road trip to Virginia Tech, a road trip to Texas, a road trip to Texas Tech, a road trip to Iowa State, and a road trip to Oklahoma State. Not to mention Baylor and Oklahoma at home. This is a very important game for West Virginia if they want to get off on the right foot for their 2022 season campaign. Same thing for Pitt, because I do think they take a step backwards, and I think the other teams in the ACC take a step forward. I think Pitt benefited from an easier schedule last year and teams being down in the ACC last year. So after the West Virginia game, Pitt gets Tennessee at home, on the road to Western Michigan, who they lost to at home. I don't think they're going to lose to them again, but it's worth mentioning. They also have to go on the road to Louisville, on the road to North Carolina, on the road to Virginia, and on the road to Miami. A much tougher schedule than what they had last year. Very important game for both West Virginia and Pitt. Next game on the list is going to be Penn State at Purdue. James Franklin a little bit on the hot seat there at Penn State. Last year Penn State went 7-6. They took a step backwards, and Purdue actually had a good season, 9-4. Penn State schedule, not all that brutal, but for Penn State fans to feel good about James Franklin, he needs to go at least 8-4 or 9-3. So winning a game on the road to Purdue to start the season is kind of important, because immediately after that they stay on the road to Auburn. 2 road games to start the year. After that, at Michigan, Minnesota at home, Ohio State at home, and Michigan State at home. So a tough schedule, but if they can get that win over Purdue, then an 8-4 or a 9-3 season is far more likely. This is an important game for Penn State, very important game for James Franklin. Next game on the list is going to be North Carolina and Appalachian State. This is actually the second game of the year for these teams. North Carolina went 6-7 last year. Mack Brown took a step back. The North Carolina fans still have faith in Mack Brown. Now for Appalachian State, they went 10-4. They beat Coastal Carolina last year. They had a pretty good team. This is an important game for both these teams, but I think it's more important for North Carolina so they can get back on the right track under Mack Brown. North Carolina's schedule, not all that difficult. Their toughest games, they get Notre Dame at home, at Miami, Pitt at home, at Virginia, and then NC State at home. But this is a very tricky road trip. Appalachian State is good enough to upset North Carolina, but if North Carolina can go on the road and beat Appalachian State, they have the potential of having a 10-win season, possibly a trip to the ACC championship. Next game on the list, NC State at East Carolina. Last year, NC State went 9-3, East Carolina 7-5. This is important for Dave Doeren, the head coach of NC State. NC State is projected to be one of the best teams in the ACC, maybe second best right behind Clemson, but this is a tricky road test to start the season. East Carolina is more than capable of beating NC State. And NC State does have a little bit of a difficult schedule this year. After this, the most difficult games they have: Texas Tech at home, on the road to Clemson, on the road to Syracuse, and I don't expect Syracuse to be good, but they are tough to beat in that dome. On the road to Louisville, and on the road to North Carolina. So 4 tricky road trips. If they can come out of Greenville, North Carolina with a win over East Carolina, then NC State might be able to compete with Clemson for that Atlantic title. Now they do have to go on the road to Clemson. Last year they beat Clemson at home, but it took everything they had, and I do think Clemson will be a better team this year. So they might have to hope that Clemson slips up in a few other games, because I think NC State will lose on the road to Clemson this year. The next game on this list is Oregon versus Georgia in Atlanta. Last year Oregon went 10-4. Of course, Georgia went 14-1, national champs. A lot of people have this as a foregone conclusion that Georgia's going to mop the floor with Oregon, and that could be the case, but it's still important for Georgia for their playoff hopes and national championship hopes. This is not a gimme game. Remember, last year Oregon did go into Ohio State and upset the Buckeyes. This isn't a true road game, but it's going to be pretty close being in Atlanta. After this, the tough games for Georgia: at South Carolina, they get Tennessee at home, at Mississippi State, and at Kentucky. So not a tough schedule, but I do think that South Carolina and Tennessee are going to be much better this year, and they do have to go on the road to Mississippi State and Kentucky later on in the year. Georgia needs to grab this win over Oregon if they want to have any hopes of repeating as national champs this year. The next game on this list, Houston at UTSA, and I do think Houston has the chance, the potential of being the best group of 5 team this year. Dana Holgorsen actually doing a pretty good job over there at Houston. His first game is going to be a big time road test at UTSA. After that, remaining tough games for Houston: at Texas Tech, at Memphis, at SMU, and at East Carolina. So some tough road trips. They need to go on the road and beat UTSA if they want to be the best group of 5 team this year. Next game on the list is going to be Utah at Florida. Kyle Whittingham at Utah has the Utes believing that number 1, they can repeat as Pac-12 champs, and number 2, they have a chance to get to the playoffs. Well, this first game will test them. They have to go on the road to Florida. Last year, Utah 10-4 Pac-12 champs. Florida was a miserable 6-7. Utah needs to go on the road and beat Florida if they want any chance of getting to the playoffs, and they do have some tough games after this. They get San Diego State at home, at UCLA, they get USC at home, at Washington State, and at Oregon. So this is going to be a challenging schedule for Utah, but if they can go on the road and beat Florida, that will boost their confidence, and maybe they do have a shot of making the playoffs. Next up on the list, Notre Dame at Ohio State. This is important for both Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame and Ryan Day at Ohio State. Last year Notre Dame went 11-2. Last year Ohio State went 11-2, so they both had a pretty good year. Tough games for Notre Dame after this game: at North Carolina, BYU in Las Vegas, at Syracuse. Remember, I don't think Syracuse will be good. It's always tough to beat them in the dome. They do get Clemson at home, at USC. So a manageable schedule, but they will be tested. Now for Ohio State, the tough games remaining after this game: you get Wisconsin at home, at Michigan State, Iowa, at Penn State, and Michigan. A little bit of an easier schedule than last year, in my opinion. So if Ohio State can beat Notre Dame in that first game at home, which I think they will, they actually have a pretty good path to the playoffs. Biggest road trips at Michigan State and at Penn State will be the biggest hurdles that they have to get over. But I think Ohio State's good enough, and they'll have enough confidence to where they can go on the road and beat Michigan State and Penn State. Now for Notre Dame, I do think they take a step back this year, but man, if they can go on the road and beat Ohio State, then a lot of people will be talking Notre Dame to the playoffs. They will have a tricky schedule to maneuver through, but that'll be a big confidence boost and a big game for building their resume for the playoffs. So y'all let me know in the comments section, which way do you think these games will go, and how important do you think that these games are to these teams? That's all I got for you for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.